Kia ora koutou te whānau. Welcome to my very first podcast. My name is Hinare Ka, also known as H. Today I'll be talking about being a Maori musician with ADHD and my diagnosis of ADHD. Over the course of the next few podcasts, I'll be featuring special guests that will be coming in to talk about the finer points of ADD or ADHD, or is known as attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and where ADHD comes from and the advantages and disadvantages of having ADD or ADHD. So sit back and relax, and I hope you enjoy my first ever podcast telling you about my journey and about my story of how I become who I am today. Alright, here we go. Episode 1 of H's story of having ADHD and where my journey begins to where I am now. Before I start this podcast, I would like to make a special dedication to my mother because of her dedication and hard work and research into getting me diagnosed is what got me here today. So I'd like to thank you, Mum. Also, a brief description about my background and about where I'm from. I am part of a family of 5. I have 2 younger siblings. I am married. I am a full-time music teacher in Ōtautahi Christchurch at the Rangiruru Girls' School. I am a proud Māori, a kuakirangi te maunga ka waipu te awa ka Ngāti Porou te iwi, and I'm a proud member of the New Zealand music industry. So, my journey starts all the way back in 1997-98 when I was Form 1, or these days also known as Year 7, where I was finally diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactive disorder. It all started out when my brother and I were having problems listening and hearing in class, so my mother took us to a hearing specialist where we had both of us tested, come back with my brother having an ear infection, so he literally could not hear in class, and my result was I could hear a pin drop in the next room. So turns out my hearing was selective. So from here, my mother started the research into what my condition could be, and she attended a seminar on ADHD. Taken to mind, ADHD was still a new thing at the time. People were still coming accustomed to this new disorder in children. But my mother was adamant that in the seminar, this person described me to a T. So the journey of my diagnosis began. Like I said before, at the time ADD and ADHD was uncommon. So being diagnosed was a lot harder back then than it is today. There was so much stigma attached to it, like it was something to be ashamed of because the general public weren't educated around what it meant to have ADHD or even what ADHD or ADD was or is. So the diagnosis process was a lot harder. For example, my diagnosis was very long and very drawn out and involved some very testing situations. My family underwent psychiatric assessments. For example, one specialist was convinced that my behaviour was brought on by abuse in the family home. So my family was placed in a situation behind a glass screen where my behaviour and reactions were monitored in different situations. It became clear that I wasn't from an abusive home, and it wasn't the reason for the way I behaved. From here, the specialists were happy to diagnose me with ADHD. So the medication starts. My first experience of taking Ritalin. Ritalin played a huge part in my younger life until my early adulthood when I started university. It completely changed my ability to concentrate and be a member of the classroom, which meant I was able to complete my schooling year. I still believe to this day if I hadn't been diagnosed and prescribed with Ritalin, I would have never have finished my high schooling years. Even though Ritalin had a positive effect, however, later on I became addicted to it, and I will talk about that in a future podcast. So, my music journey begins. I'm in Year 12 Maths, or 6th form Maths, where I instantly decide this is not for me, so I pull out of my maths class and I apply to be in the arts class. Turns out I couldn't draw either, so my next option was music. and by God, I'm glad I found that. Music was a little bit different, as I'd always had a passion for music. I played a little bit of drums and I sung in kapahaka, but I'd never officially done classroom music. Because I hadn't done year 11 or 5th form music, I had to join the 5th form music class as a 6th former. And the very first class was the theory test. And for those who have done music or are doing music will understand that musical theory is very daunting. It's very hard at first. It's very hard to take on at the first time. I thought music was about having a jam with friends, listening to music, and then going home at 3 o'clock. But very quickly, I become obsessed with this whole new form of art, the musical arts. And going alongside that, I was very fortunate to have an extremely passionate and inspiring Maori teacher at school. He spoke fluent Maori, he was a role model to my fellow classmates, and he had a huge impact on my life. For example, I'm a teacher now, and I'm here doing this podcast and talking about him and how he inspired me to be who I am. He gave me the most useful and most inspiring piece of information while I was at school. He was well aware that I had ADHD, and he was always aware of what I was doing around school. So he said to me, which didn't really make sense at the time, but it makes sense now, and it will make sense to you at the end of this podcast. He said to me, don't think or use your ADHD as a disadvantage. On the route that you are taking, it is going to be nothing but an advantage. Trust me. I didn't fully understand what he meant back then, but everything he said to me was gospel. So I used his advice, I kept his advice on board, and I still do today. I hit year 13, and by now I am head over heels for music. I'm listening to all music. I'm listening to Bone Thugs and Harmony. I'm listening to Metallica. I'm listening to the Backstreet Boys. I'm listening to everything and anything. Anything that I could get my hands on, I was listening to. I was buying CDs. I had a massive CD collection. I was listening to the radio. I definitely wasn't downloading music because it wasn't available back then. So I was buying CD after CD. And I was very fortunate in my year 13 to be in a music academy where all I did every day of the week was music, apart from a few English and te reo classes. And it was from here I knew my journey was heading to jazz school. I was so inspired by my teachers at the time. I had been on a tour to jazz school, I'd seen the tutors play, and I was destined to go. I had just started drum lessons, and I was singing with my friends, so I thought maybe I have a shot. For those who don't know what the jazz school is now known as the Art Music Arts at Art Polytech, and it is the home and birthplace of some of the greatest musicians in New Zealand. And this is where I found one of the advantages of having ADHD. It's the hyperfocus and the extreme stimulation of the mind once I have found something that is going to stimulate me because I love it. In this case, music. I was determined to get into jazz school. Even though I may have failed my first 2 auditions, it did not stop me from pursuing my dream of going to jazz school because I was so focused for the first time naturally on something that I really wanted to do. My mind was fully stimulated and I was head over heels for music and the idea of studying music. So, I get into jazz school. I signed up for the contemporary course, which I later then signed over to the jazz because after seeing the jazz musicians in real life, especially the jazz drummers and me being a drummer, it was just the natural option. I had to be able to do what they could do. I had to learn from their teachers. I had to play that music. And the result was, by my second year at jazz school, I was completely indulged in jazz music, every facet of jazz music, jazz history, jazz theory, jazz arranging, different styles and years and decades of jazz music and playing with different people. Nothing else was music to me apart from jazz and Latin music. I met some awesome people. I met some of my closest friends at jazz school who I'm still friends and still play with today. And I was around like-minded people for the first time in my life. Not only was I stimulated and focused, I was sharing that with others who were in the same boat. I did struggle through jazz school. My theory, ear training, and arranging skills weren't the best, and I did find it hard concentrating on those subjects, and it did take me a little bit longer than some to finish. But my passion and my stimulation for music it pushed me over the line. Also, it was contributed to having amazing tutors. For example, both my drum tutors at jazz school, who I will hold dear with me for the rest of my life, Mr. Ted Megger and Mr. Nick Gaffney, who helped me and taught me so much throughout my years at jazz school. During my years at jazz school, I acquired so many inspiring tips, but one of the most inspiring and useful tips I was given while I was at jazz school was by my mother. She said, every opportunity that comes your way, make sure you say yes. Even if you're unsure, you are better to give it a go and not to do so well than not to do it at all and regret not trying. So by now, during my 4 years of study, I found myself completely in my element. Like I said before, I met and studied with some of the best people I've met in my life, and they even stood beside me on my wedding day. My ADHD meant I immersed myself in my music to the point music literally became my life. I was offered so many opportunities while I was at jazz school, but my journey started the day I left jazz school. I thought I was destined to be a cruise ship musician, which I always wanted to be. I had practiced all of my Latin and jazz and reading skills up to the point where I was ready for audition. 2 days before I was planning to audition, I got my first phone call that said, and I remember it to this day, "Hey man, I've got a 5-date tour coming up in the North Island. Can you do it on drums?" So like my mother had always told me, I said yes. I had no idea of the detail. I just said yes. What have I got to lose? And I'm so glad I said yes, because the tour ended up being a 5-date tour around the North Island supporting Salmonella Dub on their New Zealand tour. I was always a big fan of Salmonella Dub, and I was always a big fan of the emerging New Zealand roots culture, and I would have never believed that this was my entry moment to the New Zealand music industry. So my focus and stimulation had changed from my journey of going down the track of being in the jazz and Latin field to now being in the roots reggae New Zealand music industry. I knew from here that this was going to be my journey. And my hyper focus was set on the path ahead. And in this time after that, I had joined multiple other reggae bands with other passionate young Maori musicians, and I'd met some awesome people. I'd done small scale touring, and it wasn't until 2012 where a good friend of mine, Aaron Tokona from the New Zealand band Weta, or at the time Maori Buzz, had asked me to fill in and play drums at the last second. And going back to what my mum always said to me, I just said yes. I had no time for rehearsal. I had no time to think. I knew whose position I was filling in for. He was a massive inspiration for me and still is. But I had to take this opportunity, and 3 hours later, I'm on stage, ready, set, go. It was here, all my passion, my hyper-focus, and all my training come to be one. And I was able to give 100%, and from here on out, I was the new drummer in the band. This is where my music career really started to take off. I was fortunate enough to play some of New Zealand's biggest festivals. I did an entire New Zealand Shapeshifter tour of the release of their Delta album. I toured with multiple other acts locally and internationally and played some of the most memorable shows of my life. A few years had passed and I had decided that my passion for singing and playing drums become equal and I wanted to do them at the same time. So in 2016, my buddy Tim and I decided that we would become a duo. We were in a Hori Buzz together, we were in Soul System together, the Merchants of Flow together. We played all kinds of sessions, all kinds of music, all around New Zealand together. So we thought it's time that we did something by ourselves. So we started our band Dillustrate, which is now going strong. It's only been going for just over 2.5 years. And in that time, we have done some pretty awesome stuff. We've recorded an album, an EP, we've toured the country, we have been able to tag onto other tours, we've had national and international radio play, we've been playlisted around the world. From that, I have been fortunate enough to play with some of the greatest musicians on earth. For example, just recently I was invited to the UK to play at the Ben Waters retirement tour, which featured the greatest ever, Ronnie Wood from the Rolling Stones. Yes. Now, coming back to what I said about my teacher, this finally started to make sense, as he was like, your ADHD is going to become a massive advantage of whatever you do, especially down this route of being a musician. And I get it now. I don't have to get on stage and act like anyone else. I don't have to get on stage and try and turn on this hyperactive, over-the-top, eccentric, loud performer. I can just be myself, which is all of that, because I have ADHD. And my advice for anyone who out there who has children or friends or even has it themselves is there is never, or I'm sorry, people might disagree with me, but I do not see ADHD as being a disadvantage. I see it as being a massive advantage. There's always going to be problems during the primary and adolescent years of people trying to understand and tolerate the growth of someone with ADHD, because it is intense. To all my friends and family and everyone who's stuck with me, they can attest to what I'm saying and to what I'm talking about. So that kind of sums up my journey and who I am and my adventure of becoming a Maori musician with ADHD. So thank you so much for tuning in and for listening to my very first podcast. It has been a blast. And like I said before, I will be having guests coming in to talk about their journey and delving deeper into what ADHD and ADD really is. And we will also be discussing ways to manage it and strategies to use ADHD and ADD as an advantage. Mauri ora whānau, tune in soon. But I swear I still remember the times that we could hide away.